Most people think the US government is either ignoring Bitcoin or trying to kill it. But right now, sitting in the US Senate, is a piece of legislation that could be the most significant pro-Bitcoin law ever passed in American history. It already cleared the House of Representatives, and most Bitcoin beginners have never heard of it. So, what is it? How close is it to becoming law? And what actually changes if it passes? What's up? I'm Sats, and today we're making the Clarity Act actually make sense. Let's keep it simple. To understand why this bill matters, you first need to understand the problem it's trying to solve, because the problem is genuinely strange, and it's been holding Bitcoin back in ways most people don't realize. For the last decade, the US crypto industry has been operating without clear rules. And I don't mean vague rules or complicated rules, I mean nobody could agree on which government agency was even in charge. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, claimed most crypto tokens were securities and therefore under their control. The CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, said Bitcoin and Ethereum were commodities and therefore under theirs. Both agencies were right about parts of it. Neither had clear authority over all of it. And rather than Congress stepping in to draw a clear line, what happened instead was regulation by enforcement. Companies only found out what the rules were when they got sued. Think about what that means in practice. A bank wants to offer Bitcoin services to its customers. Before it can do that, its legal team needs to know exactly which rules apply, which agency has oversight, and what happens if they get it wrong. With no clear answer to any of those questions, the safest option is to do nothing, so they do nothing. A pension fund wants to allocate a small percentage of its portfolio to Bitcoin. Same problem, same result. A major asset manager wants to launch new Bitcoin products. Lawyers say the regulatory risk is too high. They wait. That waiting, multiplied across thousands of institutions, represents an enormous amount of capital sitting on the sidelines. Not because these institutions don't see the case for Bitcoin, because they can't get clear legal answers about how to hold it. This is the problem the Clarity Act was designed to solve. The bill does several things, but the core of it is this. It draws a clear legal line between the SEC and the CFTC for every digital asset in the United States. Bitcoin and Ethereum are classified as digital commodities, regulated by the CFTC. That gives them the same regulatory category as gold and oil. Clear, established, understood by every institution in the world. It also requires exchanges to follow proper rules around customer fund segregation, which is a direct response to the FTX collapse in 2022, when billions of dollars of customer funds disappeared because the exchange had been mixing them with its own money. Under the Clarity Act, that becomes explicitly illegal with no ambiguity. And it opens the door for new Bitcoin financial products. More ETFs, custody services from major banks, pension fund allocations, all the institutional money that has been sitting on the sidelines waiting for a clear legal framework to operate within. Here's where the story gets complicated, and this is important because a lot of coverage of this bill makes it sound more certain than it actually is. The Clarity Act passed the House of Representatives in July 2025 with a strong bipartisan vote of 294 to 134. That is a genuinely impressive margin. It showed that supporting crypto legislation had become politically viable on both sides of the aisle. But the Senate is a different story. Two Senate committees, Banking and Agriculture, have been working on their own versions of the bill. They need to reconcile their drafts with each other and with the House version before it can go to a full Senate vote. And in January 2026, just as a Senate Banking Committee markup was scheduled, Coinbase, the largest US crypto exchange, publicly withdrew its support, saying the current text could harm innovation. Within hours, the markup was postponed. No new date was announced. As of right now, the bill is stalled. Treasury Secretary Bessent has signaled a possible spring 2026 signing timeline. JP Morgan analysts have identified mid-year passage as their base case and called it a potential positive catalyst for crypto markets. The practical deadline is roughly May to June 2026, before midterm election cycle pressure starts consuming Senate floor time. So it is close, closer than it has ever been, but it is not done. What happens if it passes? The most direct effect is that the legal barrier blocking institutional capital from entering Bitcoin at scale gets removed. Banks can offer Bitcoin custody and trading to customers. Pension funds can allocate. More ETF products can launch. The pool of buyers expands significantly and in a structured, sustained way. That is not the same as a guarantee that Bitcoin's price goes up. Markets are complicated and nothing is certain. But the removal of regulatory uncertainty is a genuine structural change, not just sentiment. It is the difference between institutions saying they want to own Bitcoin and institutions being legally able to own it properly. What happens if it doesn't pass? The industry has fallback options. The SEC and CFTC have launched a joint initiative called Project Crypto, committing to coordinated rulemaking regardless of whether legislation passes. Major firms like Coinbase and Circle are pursuing bank charters through the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency as a parallel route to federal legitimacy. These are partial substitutes, useful but not the same as a comprehensive law passed by Congress. The honest picture is this. The Clarity Act represents the most serious attempt in U.S. history to give Bitcoin and the broader crypto industry a clear legal home. It has more political support than any previous effort. It is closer to passing than it has ever been, and it still might not make it across the line in 2026. For a Bitcoin beginner watching this, here is what matters practically. This is not something you need to act on. It is something you need to understand. Because if this bill passes, it will be a major news story and Bitcoin will almost certainly move on the news. Understanding what the law actually does, rather than just seeing a price move and wondering what happened, is exactly the kind of knowledge that separates informed holders from people who get caught up in the moment and make bad decisions. Alright, let's bring it together. The Clarity Act is a U.S. law that would establish clear regulatory rules for Bitcoin and digital assets, ending a decade of legal ambiguity that has kept institutional money on the sidelines. It passed the House in July 2025 with strong bipartisan support. It is currently stalled in the Senate, with a possible mid-2026 timeline for passage if negotiations succeed. If it passes, it removes the legal barriers that have prevented banks, pension funds, and asset managers from fully participating in Bitcoin markets. That is a genuine structural change with real implications. If it doesn't pass in 2026, the industry has partial fallback routes through regulatory coordination and bank charters, but the full benefit gets delayed. Either way, this is one of the most important Bitcoin stories of 2026. And now you understand it. If this helped, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Did you know this bill existed before watching this? I genuinely want to know how many people are tracking this one. Here are 2 videos worth watching next. If you want to understand why regulatory clarity unlocks so much institutional money, the video on Bitcoin ETFs explains how the first wave of institutional access worked and why it mattered. And if you want the full picture of why Bitcoin has value and where the long-term case comes from, that video builds it from the ground up. Stack smart. Stay curious. See you in the next stack.